My daughter forgot to hang up the phone. I heard her say he has to go to a nursing home. I did not say anything. They sold the house for $950,000, or so they thought. They returned from a business trip smiling. On the doorstep they found a note, and when they read it, they started screaming. My name is Clint Reeves, and I am 72 years old. Most people look at me and see a retired man with grease on his hands, tinkering with a 1967 Mustang in his garage. They see a widower who walks with a slight limp and assumes I am slowing down. They are wrong. For 40 years, I was a forensic accountant. I hunted down embezzlement schemes for major corporations. I traced hidden assets for federal investigations. I know how to find the truth buried under mountains of numbers. I know that people lie, but math never does. My daughter Megan and her husband Brad forgot who I used to be. They forgot that I made a living destroying people who thought they were smarter than me. It started on a Tuesday afternoon. The Seattle rain was hammering against the metal roof of my garage. It was the kind of gray day that makes your joints ache. Megan had borrowed my truck to run some errands because her luxury SUV was in the shop again. When she pulled into the driveway, she did not get out immediately. She sat there with the engine running. I was under the hood of the Mustang adjusting the carburetor. I had my phone connected to the garage Bluetooth speakers to listen to jazz. Suddenly, the music cut out. The speakers crackled and connected to my truck's system instead. Megan had paired her phone to my garage system last week during a barbecue, and she had forgotten to disconnect. The voice that filled my garage was not jazz. It was my daughter. She was talking to Brad. Her voice was crystal clear, and it dripped with a coldness that froze the blood in my veins. She said, "The old man is becoming a burden, Brad. I cannot take it anymore." I wiped the grease from my hands and stood perfectly still. I did not breathe. Brad's voice came through the speakers next. He sounded impatient. He asked, "When can we move him?" Megan laughed. It was a cruel sound. She said, "I found a place called Sunset Pines. They have a budget wing for state-subsidized cases. It is cheap and it smells like bleach, but it will do. Once we get him in there, we can list the house next week. With the market the way it is, we can get $950,000 easily. That pays off your shark loans and gets me that Porsche." I stood there in the center of my garage, surrounded by my tools and the smell of oil. My heart did not race. My hands did not shake. A strange calm washed over me. It was the same cold focus I used to get when I found a discrepancy in a ledger. I was not listening to my daughter anymore. I was listening to a suspect. Megan continued talking. She said, "He is so senile he will probably thank us for it. We just need to get him to sign the power of attorney papers tonight. Tell him it is for his medical insurance update. He trusts me. He is pathetic." I reached over and pressed the disconnect button on the wall unit. The garage went silent. The rain continued to pound on the roof. I walked to the sink and washed the grease from my hands. I scrubbed until my skin was raw. I looked at myself in the small mirror above the sink. I did not see a victim. I saw a man who had just been handed a case file. I dried my hands and walked to the door that led into the kitchen. The door handle felt cold steel in my grip. I opened it just as Megan walked in from the garage entrance. She was smiling. It was her best smile, the one she used when she wanted money. "Hi, Dad," she chirped. She put a grocery bag on the counter. "I bought those ribs you like for dinner. I thought we could have a nice family meal tonight." I looked at her. I looked for the little girl I taught to ride a bike. I looked for the teenager I comforted when she got her heart broken. She was gone. Standing in front of me was a predator in designer heels. I forced the corners of my mouth up. It was a mask I had worn 1,000 times in boardrooms. "That sounds delicious, sweetheart," I said. My voice was steady. "I am starving." She kissed my cheek. I felt nothing. The war had begun. Dinner that night was a masterclass in deception. We sat around the mahogany dining table that my late wife and I bought 30 years ago. The chandelier cast a warm glow over the roast beef, but the air was thick with tension. Brad sat across from me. He was 38 years old and wore a suit that cost more than his car. He was a mediocre stockbroker who thought he was a wolf of Wall Street. He poured himself a glass of my expensive Cabernet without asking. So Clint Brad started. He swirled the wine in his glass. Megan and I have been talking. We are worried about you. This house is so big. The maintenance must be exhausting for a man your age. I cut a piece of meat slowly. I chewed it thoroughly before answering. I am managing fine, Brad, I said. I like the space. It holds memories. Megan reached across the table and touched my hand. Her fingers were cold. Dad, we just want what is best for you. We found this lovely community. It is like a resort. You would have people your own age to talk to. You would not be so lonely. I looked at my grandson Leo. He was 10 years old and sitting at the end of the table pushing peas around his plate. He was the only innocent thing in this room. He looked up at me with sad eyes. Mom said you are going away, Grandpa, he whispered. Megan's eyes widened. She shot a glare at Leo that could cut glass. Grandpa is just going on a vacation, Leo, she said quickly. I smiled at Leo. Do not worry, sport. Grandpa is not going anywhere he does not want to go. I turned my gaze back to Brad. You mentioned a community. How much does this resort cost? Brad exchanged a glance with Megan. Well, that is the great part, Clint. It is very affordable. We can handle all the finances for you. In fact, we brought some paperwork for you to sign. Just routine stuff to help us manage your medical bills and property taxes, so you do not have to worry. He pulled a folder from his briefcase and slid it across the table. I did not open it. I knew exactly what was inside. It was a durable power of attorney. It would give them total control over my assets. It would let them sell this house and dump me in a state facility. I pretended to squint. I forgot my reading glasses upstairs. I lied. I am so tired tonight. My eyes are blurry. Leave it here. I will sign it in the morning. Brad looked annoyed. He tapped his finger on the folder. It is really important we get this done tonight, Clint. The notary is coming by early tomorrow. I yawned. A loud, exaggerated yawn. I am an old man, Brad. When the sun goes down, my brain turns off. I stood up. The roast was delicious, Megan. Thank you. I walked out of the dining room. I could feel their eyes drilling into my back. As I climbed the stairs, I heard Brad hiss. He better sign that damn paper tomorrow. We have the realtor coming at noon. I went into my bedroom and locked the door. I waited 5 minutes until I heard the television turn on downstairs. Then I moved. I did not go to bed. I went into my walk-in closet and pushed aside a row of winter coats. Behind them was a small safe. I spun the dial. Left to 20, right to 10, left to 5. The heavy door clicked open. I took out my laptop. This was not the computer I kept in the living room for checking emails. This was my work machine. Encrypted. Secure. I sat at my desk and opened the laptop. The screen glowed blue in the dark room. I cracked my knuckles. It was time for an audit. I logged into my bank accounts. I had added Megan to my checking account 2 years ago to help with groceries. That was a mistake. I pulled up the transaction history. My eyes scanned the lines of data. It was worse than I thought. It was not just groceries. There were withdrawals for $200 here, $300 there, small enough to go unnoticed if you were not looking. But I was looking. Over the last 6 months, she had siphoned off $12,000. But that was just the tip of the iceberg. I navigated to the credit bureaus. I requested a full credit report for myself. When the file downloaded, I felt a knot of rage tighten in my stomach. There were 3 credit cards opened in my name in the last 4 months. I had never seen these cards. One was maxed out at $15,000. The charges were all from online casinos and luxury boutiques in Las Vegas. Another card had a balance of $20,000. I tracked the IP addresses of the applications. They came from this house. They came from Brad's laptop. They were not just waiting for me to die. They were actively bleeding me dry while I was still breathing. They had stolen my identity. They had leveraged my perfect credit score to fund their gambling and their vanity. I looked at the total debt. $55,000. If they sold the house for $950,000, they would pay off this debt pocket, the rest, and leave me with nothing in a nursing home that smelled like bleach. I closed the laptop. I did not feel sad anymore. Sadness is a luxury for people who have options. I had no options. I only had a strategy. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I had not called in 5 years. It rang twice. Harold Solomon speaking. His voice was gravel and smoke. "Harold, it is Clint Reeves," I said. "Clint, it is 11 at night. Did someone die?" "Not yet," I said. "But someone is about to wish they had. I need to see you tomorrow morning." 7 a.m. "Before your secretary gets in, is this about the estate planning we talked about?" Harold asked. "No," I said. "This is about asset protection. And Harold, bring the paperwork for an irrevocable trust." There was a pause on the other end. Then Harold chuckled. It was a dry, dark sound. "Someone tried to hustle you, did they?" "They tried," I said. "I am going to teach them a lesson about compound interest and consequences." I hung up the phone. I lay down on my bed, fully clothed. I stared at the ceiling. I did not sleep. I listened to the sounds of my house, the settling of the wood beams, the wind against the window. Tomorrow this house would no longer be mine, but it would never belong to them. The next morning, I left the house before the sun came up. I left a note on the kitchen counter saying I went for an early walk. I drove my truck to downtown Seattle. The city was waking up. Delivery trucks were double parked, and steam was rising from the manholes. I parked in front of the brick building that had survived the tech boom. Harold's office smelled of old paper and expensive cigars. He was sitting behind a desk that was large enough to land a plane on. Harold was my age, but he looked older. He had seen the worst of humanity in divorce courts and probate hearings. He poured 2 fingers of scotch into a crystal glass and slid it across the desk to me. "It is 7:15 in the morning, Harold," I said. He shrugged. "It is antiseptic. Drink it. You look like you have seen a ghost." "I saw a demon," I said. I took a sip. The liquid burned pleasantly. I told him everything. I told him about the Bluetooth call, the fake dinner, the forged credit cards, the gambling debts. Harold listened without interrupting. He tapped a gold pen against his notepad. When I finished, he leaned back in his leather chair. "So what is the play, Clint?" he asked. "Do you want to press charges? We have enough for fraud, identity theft, and elder abuse. I can have them in handcuffs by lunchtime." I shook my head. "No, handcuffs are too easy. They will play the victim. They will cry to the jury that they were desperate. They will say I was mentally declining and gave them permission. I do not want a court battle, Harold. I want to surgically remove them from my life. I want them to feel the weight of their greed." Harold smiled. It was a shark's smile. "I like where this is going. I want to transfer the house," I said. "Not to them. To a trust." "An irrevocable trust," Harold nodded. "Beneficiary?" "Leo," I said. "My grandson. He is the only one who is innocent. I want the trust to be managed by you until Leo turns 25. "Done," Harold said, scribbling on his pad. But you know the rules, Clint. Once you move the asset into the trust, it is not yours anymore. You cannot sell it. You cannot borrow against it. And most importantly, they cannot touch it. Even if you die tomorrow, they get nothing. That is not enough, I said. I leaned forward. They are planning to sell the house next week. They think they have the power of attorney. Harold raised an eyebrow. So we let them think that. Exactly, I said. But I am going to beat them to it. I want to sell the house today. Harold stopped writing. You want to sell the house that is going into the trust. I want to sell the equity, I said. I want to do a cash-out sale to a private investment firm. You know the ones. They buy ugly houses for cash. Fast closing. No inspections. Red Shark Holdings. Harold said immediately. I know their VP. They are vultures. They will offer you 80% of market value. I do not care about the price, I said. I care about the speed. I want the money wired to the trust account within 48 hours. And the physical house, Harold asked. I will be gone, I said. The new owners can deal with the eviction. Harold started laughing. It was a deep belly laugh. You are going to sell the house out from under them while they are measuring the drapes. I am going to leave them with a lease they do not own for a house that is not theirs, paid for by credit cards that are about to be frozen, I said. Harold picked up his phone. I will call Red Shark. You start signing the papers. This is going to be a busy morning. I spent the next 3 hours signing my name. I signed over the title. I signed the trust documents. I signed the sale agreement with Red Shark Holdings. By 10 a.m., I no longer owned the home I had lived in for 30 years. I was technically homeless, and I had never felt more free. Harold walked me to the elevator. You are a cold son of a bitch, Clint, he said affectionately. I learned from the best, I said. One more thing, Harold said as the elevator doors opened. What happens when they come home and find the locks changed? I stepped into the elevator. I checked my watch. By the time they come home, the ink will be dry and I will be on a plane. But I will leave them a note. I would hate for them to be confused. I drove back to the house. It was 11 a.m. Megan was in the kitchen drinking a kale smoothie. She looked up when I walked in. Did you have a nice walk, Dad? She asked. She sounded cheerful. It was enlightening, I said. I walked past her to the stairs. Dante! Forget the realtor is coming at noon, she called out. We need to tidy up your room. I paused on the stairs. My hand gripped the banister. Do not worry, sweetheart, I said. By the time I am done, my room will be completely empty. She thought I meant cleaning. She had no idea I meant erasing my existence. I went upstairs and pulled my suitcase from the closet. I did not pack clothes. I packed the photos of my wife. I packed my military medals. I packed Leo S. drawings. Everything else was just stuff. And stuff can be replaced. Dignity cannot. I heard the doorbell ring at noon. It was the realtor. I heard Megan's fake laugh echoing from the foyer. Oh yes, he is just upstairs. He is so excited to move to the new community. I snapped my suitcase shut. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. I walked to the window and looked out at the bay. The water was gray and choppy. It was a perfect day for a funeral. And today I was burying my relationship with my daughter. I took the bottle of heart medication from my nightstand, the one they had refilled yesterday. I opened it and poured the pills into my hand. They were blue. My heart medication was white. Xanax, I whispered. High dose. They wanted me to sleep through the open house. They wanted me drooling in a chair while they sold my life to the highest bidder. I walked into the bathroom and flushed the blue pills down the toilet. I watched them swirl away. Then I went back to the bedroom and sat in the chair by the window. I waited. I was not the prey anymore. I was the hunter, and the trap was set. The morning sun hit the kitchen island, but it brought no warmth. I sat there with a mug of black coffee watching the steam rise and disappear. It was the day after I had sold my own house out from under my feet, but to the two people sitting across from me, I was still just the confused old man who needed to be managed. Megan and Brad were vibrating with a nervous energy that they tried to disguise as excitement. It was the kind of energy sharks have when they smell blood in the water. Megan slid a stack of glossy brochures across the marble countertop. They fanned out perfectly, like a winning hand of poker cards. The top one featured a photo of a silver-haired couple laughing while holding tennis rackets. The words "Sunset Pines Luxury Senior Living" were printed in gold foil script that caught the light. It looked expensive. It looked exclusive. It looked like a lie. "Look at this," Dad Megan said. Her voice was too loud for the quiet kitchen. "We made some calls this morning and pulled some strings. Sunset Pines usually has a 2-year waiting list, but because Brad knows the director, they are willing to make an exception for you." I picked up the brochure. The paper felt heavy and slick. I opened it and pretended to study the amenities. I saw photos of a manicured garden, a generic library with fake books, and a dining hall that looked suspiciously like a high school cafeteria with better lighting. I knew exactly what Sunset Pines was. I had audited their parent company 10 years ago. They were a volume business. They packed seniors into small rooms, sedated them with cheap medication, and drained their bank accounts until the checks bounced. Then they moved them to the state ward. It was a warehouse for the unwanted, not a resort. "It looks very fancy," I said slowly, allowing a tremor to enter my voice. "Is it expensive? I do not want to be a burden on you two." Brad took a bite of his bagel and chewed aggressively. "Don't worry about the money, Clint. We have run the numbers. With the sale of this house, we can cover the entrance fee and the first 5 years. After that, the investment portfolio we are building for you will kick in. It is all taken care of." I looked at Brad. He could not even manage his own credit card debt yet. He was talking about managing my investment portfolio. The audacity was breathtaking. He was talking about using my money to pay for my imprisonment so he could drive a car he could not afford. "But will I have friends there?" I asked. I looked at Megan. I let my eyes water just a little. "It is scary to start over at my age, sweetheart. I do not know anyone." Megan reached out and squeezed my arm. Her nails dug into my skin. "Of course you will make friends, Dad. Everyone there is just like you. They are looking for companionship. And we will visit. We will visit all the time." That was the biggest lie of all. I knew that once I signed those papers and walked through the doors of Sunset Pines, I would never see them again unless they needed a signature for a check. I looked at her face. I looked for a trace of guilt. I looked for a flicker of hesitation that said she remembered who I was. I remembered teaching her to drive in the parking lot of the high school. I remembered paying for her braces. I remembered holding her when she cried after her prom date stood her up. I searched for that daughter, but she was not there. The woman in front of me was calculating how long it would take to turn my bedroom into a yoga studio. "It does look nice," I said, closing the brochure. The gold foil letters seemed to mock me. "If you think it is best, then I trust you." Brad practically choked on his coffee. He set the mug down with a clatter. "That is great, Clint. That is really great. We actually have the admission paperwork right here. If we get it signed and faxed by noon, we can secure your spot. We do not want to lose it to someone else." He pulled a thick folder from his briefcase. He did not even try to hide his eagerness. He pushed a pen toward me. It was a Mont Blanc pen I had given him for Christmas 3 years ago. He was using my own gift to sign my life away. I put on my reading glasses. I took the folder. I opened it to the signature page. My eyes scanned the legal jargon. It was standard predatory language. It gave them full medical power of attorney and full financial guardianship. It authorized the immediate liquidation of assets to cover care costs. It was a death warrant for my freedom. "I need to read this carefully," I said. "You know how I am. Old habits from the accounting days." Megan's smile faltered for a second. "Dad, it is just standard boilerplate. We already read it." I smiled at her. "I know, pumpkin. But indulge an old man. I will just take this to the study for 10 minutes. I want to make sure I understand the visitation rights." I stood up and walked to my study before they could protest. I closed the door and locked it. My heart was beating slow and steady. I moved to my desk. In the top drawer sat a folder that looked identical to the one Brad had given me. I had prepared it last night with Harold. The documents inside my folder were masterfully crafted forgeries. They looked exactly like the Sunset Pines admission forms. They had the same letterhead, the same font, the same legal formatting. But the content was gibberish. The clauses canceled each other out. The power of attorney granted authority over a bank account that had been closed in 1995. The medical proxy was assigned to a Mr. Donald Duck. It was a legal nullity, a joke. I swapped the documents. I put the real forms in my shredder and watched them turn into confetti. I placed the fake documents into the folder Brad had given me. I waited another 2 minutes to make it realistic. I checked my reflection in the window. I fixed my collar. I needed to look defeated. I needed to look like a man who had given up. I unlocked the door and walked back to the kitchen. Megan and Brad were whispering furiously. They stopped abruptly when I entered. "Okay," I said, letting out a long sigh. I sat down heavily. I read it. "It seems fair." Megan let out a breath she had been holding. She uncapped the pen for me. "Just sign by the yellow tabs, Dad." I took the pen. I hesitated. My hand hovered over the paper. I saw them lean in. Their eyes were wide and hungry. They were physically leaning toward the paper as if their will could force the ink to flow. "Are you sure this is the right thing?" I asked softly. "Yes, Dad," Megan said. Her voice was tight. "It is the only way." I lowered the pen. I signed my name. Clint Reeves. The letters were loops of blue ink. With each stroke I felt a chain breaking. I signed the financial agreement. I signed the medical waiver. I signed the release of liability. "There," I said, capping the pen. "It is done." Brad snatched the folder away before the ink was even dry. He flipped through the pages, checking every signature. He looked like a man who had just won the lottery. "Perfect," he said. "This is perfect. I will fax this over right now." Megan stood up and hugged me. It was a stiff, awkward hug. "You made the right choice, Dad. You are going to be so happy there." "I am sure I will be," I said. "I am sure it will be an adventure." She pulled away and looked at her watch. "Oh, look at the time. We need to get ready. Our flight to Vegas leaves in 4 hours. We have that big client meeting." "A client meeting," I repeated. "Of course, you two work so hard." "We will be back on Monday," Brad said, shoving the folder into his briefcase. "We will help you pack then. You can move in on Tuesday." "Tuesday," I said. "That sounds fine." I watched them scramble out of the kitchen. They were already celebrating. I could hear them in the hallway. Brad was laughing. Megan was talking about champagne. They were so blinded by their greed that they never questioned why I surrendered so easily. They never asked why a man who spent 40 years catching liars would fall for such a clumsy con. I picked up my cold coffee and walked to the sink. I poured it down the drain. The black liquid swirled away. I rinsed the cup and placed it in the dishwasher. "Tuesday," they said. On Tuesday, they would come back to move me into a nursing home. But on Tuesday, I would be sitting on a beach in Costa Rica, and they would be standing on the curb with a worthless piece of paper and a lock they could not open. I went to the living room and sat in my armchair. I looked around the room. I had built these bookshelves. I had laid this hardwood floor. I loved this house, but I loved my dignity more. And seeing the look on their faces when they realized they had been played, that was worth more than any real estate. I closed my eyes and listened to the sound of them packing their suitcases upstairs. They were packing for a victory lap in Las Vegas. They had no idea they were packing for their own funeral. Let them have their weekend. Let them drink their expensive champagne and toast to their brilliance. The hangover was coming, and it was going to be brutal. The storm outside had intensified, matching the turmoil that should have been raging inside me. But I felt no turmoil. I felt only a cold, clinical detachment. It was 8 o'clock in the evening. The house was dark except for the lamp beside my reading chair. I sat with a book open on my lap, but I was not reading words. I was reading intentions. Megan walked into the room. She was moving quietly, almost like a ghost. She carried a silver tray with a glass of water and a small paper cup. It was the same routine we had followed for 3 years since my heart attack. Every night at 8, she brought me my medication. It used to be an act of love. Tonight, it was an act of war. "Here you go, Dad," she said softly. Her voice had that sickeningly sweet tone she had adopted since I signed the papers. "Time for your heart medicine. You need to be strong for the big move on Tuesday." I looked at the tray. I looked at her hands. They were steady. She did not shake. She did not sweat. She was handing her father a chemical leash, and she did not even blink. I reached out and took the small paper cup. Inside rolled a single white pill. It looked exactly like my usual beta blocker. Same size, same shape, same chalky white color. To the untrained eye, it was identical. But I do not have an untrained eye. I spent 40 years looking for the one number in a spreadsheet of millions that did not belong. I spent my life noticing the anomaly. I held the pill between my thumb and forefinger. I held it up to the light of the lamp. "It looks a little different tonight," I said. My voice was rough. "Did the pharmacy change suppliers?" Megan froze. Just for a fraction of a second. It was a micro-expression of panic that vanished as quickly as it appeared. "Oh yes," she said quickly. "The pharmacist said they switched to a generic brand. It is the exact same formula, Dad, just a different manufacturer. Drink up. You need your rest." I looked at her. She was standing over me, watching me like a hawk. Usually she would leave the room to let me take it in peace. Tonight she waited. She needed to see me swallow it. She needed to ensure I would be unconscious for the next 12 hours so I would not ask questions about the Packers coming tomorrow or the Red Shark investors doing a perimeter check. I put the pill in my mouth. I took a large gulp of water. I threw my head back and swallowed. "Good night, sweetheart," I said. "Good night, Dad. Sleep tight." She took the tray and walked out. She closed the door behind her. As soon as the latch clicked, I leaned forward and spit the pill into my hand. I had tucked it under my tongue, a trick I learned from a client who tried to fake insanity to avoid prison. I turned on my desk lamp and pulled out a magnifying glass. I placed the wet pill on a tissue. I studied the imprint. My heart medication was stamped with the code L40. This pill was stamped with TZ1. I pulled out my phone and typed the code into a pill identifier database. The search result loaded instantly. Triazolam. Brand name Halcyon. A powerful sedative used to treat severe insomnia. Side effects include memory loss, confusion, and loss of coordination. In high doses on an elderly patient with a heart condition, it could induce a coma or respiratory failure. I sat back in my chair. The room felt suddenly very cold. They were not just trying to sedate me. They were willing to risk killing me. If my heart stopped in the night, they would just cry at the funeral and collect the insurance money faster. It was efficient. It was brutal. It was business. I needed proof. Not for the police, but for myself. I needed to see the physical manifestation of their poison. I looked at the corner of the room. Standing there was a large ficus tree in a ceramic pot. My late wife had bought that tree 20 years ago. She had named it Fred. She talked to it every day. It was vibrant and green, a living memory of her care. I stood up and walked over to the tree. I felt a pang of guilt for what I was about to do. "I am sorry, Fred," I whispered, "but I need you to be my witness." I dissolved the pill in half a glass of water. The white powder swirled like smoke. I poured the mixture into the soil at the base of the tree. I did not sleep that night. I barricaded my door with a heavy chair, just in case the sedative was meant to be followed by a pillow over the face. I sat in the dark listening to the wind howl. I thought about every soccer game I had coached. I thought about every scraped knee I had bandaged. I thought about the college tuition I had paid. I balanced the ledger of my life. The credit column was full of love and sacrifice. The debit column was full of betrayal. The account was closed. The next morning I woke up before dawn. The house was silent. I walked over to the corner of the room. The ficus tree was dead. It had not just wilted. It had collapsed. The leaves had turned a sickly yellow and brown, curling in on themselves, as if they were trying to escape the poison in their veins. The branches drooped heavily towards the floor. It was a shocking, violent transformation. I stared at the dead plant. I touched a brittle leaf, and it crumbled to dust in my fingers. If I had swallowed that pill, that would be my brain. That would be my heart. I felt a tear run down my cheek. It was the last tear I would ever shed for my family. That tear was not for me. It was for the death of the father I used to be. The man who believed in unconditional love was gone. He died with that tree. The man who remained was the auditor, and the auditor had found fraud. I heard footsteps in the hallway. It was Brad. He was up early, probably to check if the old man was still breathing. I quickly moved the chair away from the door. I sat on the edge of the bed and slumped my shoulders. I let my mouth hang open slightly. I made my eyes look vacant. Brad opened the door without knocking. He peeked in. When he saw me sitting there looking dazed, a grin spread across his face. "Good morning, Clint," he said loudly. "Sleep well?" I looked at him slowly. I blinked. "I feel heavy," I mumbled. "My head is swimming." "That is just the excitement," Brad said, stepping into the room. He did not even look at the dead tree in the corner. He was too focused on his victory. "Listen, Megan and I are heading out to the airport. The Packers will be here in an hour. Just stay in your room, okay? Rest up. We do not want you getting in the way." I nodded weakly. "Okay, Brad. Have a safe trip." He checked his watch. He looked at me one last time with a mixture of pity and disgust. Then he turned and left. I waited until I heard the front door slam. I waited until I heard the engine of their car fade into the distance. Then I stood up. I stood up straight. The fog in my head was an act. My mind was sharper than a razor blade. I walked over to the dead ficus tree. I picked up the heavy pot. It weighed about 30 pounds, but I lifted it with ease, fueled by adrenaline and rage. I carried it downstairs. I walked into the kitchen. The breakfast dishes were still in the sink. The brochure for Sunset Pines was still on the counter. I placed the dead tree right in the center of the kitchen island. It was a grotesque centerpiece, a monument to their cruelty. I went to the drawer and took out a notepad. I wrote a single line on the top page, "For the garden at your new house." I tore the page off and stuck it to one of the dead branches. Then I went to the garage. I picked up a shovel. I was not going to bury a body. I was going to bury their future. The Packers were coming in an hour. The Red Shark investors were coming in too. I had a lot of work to do. I walked out into the cool morning air. The storm had passed. The sky was a brilliant hard blue. It was a beautiful day for an eviction. I took a deep breath. The air tasted clean. It tasted like justice. The sound of a zipper closing is usually a mundane noise. It is the sound of jackets being fastened or bags being shut. But in the quiet of my house that morning, the sound of the zipper on Brad's Louis Vuitton suitcase sounded like a weapon being cocked. It was sharp and aggressive. I lay in my bed with my eyes closed. I regulated my breathing, keeping it shallow and rhythmic. To the observer, I was an old man in a deep chemical sleep, induced by the pill they thought I had swallowed the night before. To me, I was an undercover agent in the final minutes of a sting operation. My bedroom door was slightly ajar. I could hear their footsteps pacing frantically in the hallway. They were not moving with the steady rhythm of professionals heading to a business meeting. They were moving with the erratic, twitchy energy of addicts. "Did you pack the lucky tie?" Brad hissed. His voice was tight. "I packed it," Megan replied. Her heels clicked on the hardwood floor. "Did you transfer the funds from the joint account? We need the buy-in money for the high roller table." "I did," Brad said. "It is everything we have left until the house sale clears on Tuesday. We have to win, Megan. We have to win big this time." "We will win," she said. Her voice had that delusional optimism that always precedes a disaster. "I can feel it. The luck is turning." I lay there and listened to them bet their future on a feeling. They were taking the last few $1,000s they had not yet stolen from me, and they were flying to Las Vegas to put it on black. They called it a business trip to meet partners. It was actually a desperate pilgrimage to the altar of greed. I heard their footsteps approach my door. I relaxed my facial muscles. I let my mouth fall open slightly. I slowed my breathing even more. This was the performance of a lifetime. The door creaked open. The smell of Megan's expensive perfume wafted into the room. It was floral and cloying, masking the scent of desperation that clung to them. "He is out cold," Brad whispered. He was standing right beside the bed. I could feel his presence looming over me. "Good," Megan said. "That pill worked wonders. He won't wake up until tomorrow morning. By then we will be checking into the Bellagio." Brad leaned down. I could feel his breath on my face. It smelled of coffee and mints. He was checking to see if I was really asleep. He poked my shoulder, not gently. He jabbed it with a finger. "Clint," he said loudly. "Hey, Clint, we are leaving now." I did not move. I did not twitch. I mastered the involuntary reflex to recoil from his touch. "He is gone," Megan said. "Totally under. Let's go, we are going to miss the flight." "Wait," Brad said. "We need to be sure. We cannot have him wandering around if he wakes up early. He might answer the phone or trigger the alarm." I heard the jingle of keys. My keys. The spare set that used to hang in the kitchen. "Lock him in," Brad said. I felt a surge of cold rage in my gut. Locking an elderly man in a room without access to water or a bathroom is not just cruel. It is criminal. It is a felony. But I kept my eyes closed. I needed them to commit the act. I needed the final piece of evidence that they had ceased to view me as a human being. I heard them step out of the room. The door closed with a soft thud. Then came the sound that sealed their fate. Click. The deadbolt slid into place. They had locked me in my own bedroom in the house I had built with my own money. They had imprisoned me like a dangerous animal. "Test it," Megan said. I heard the doorknob rattle. It held fast. "Perfect," she said. "Let's go." I listened to their footsteps retreat down the hallway. I heard them descending the stairs. Their voices faded into the distance, replaced by the sounds of luggage wheels rolling across the floor. I lay there for another 3 minutes. I counted the seconds. 180. 181. I heard the front door open and close. I heard the beep of the car alarm disarming. I heard the engine of the rental car roar to life. It was a muscle car. Brad always rented muscle cars to compensate for his lack of power in the real world. The car backed out of the driveway. The engine revved aggressively as they sped down the street. The sound grew fainter and fainter until it was swallowed by the ambient noise of the neighborhood. They were gone. I opened my eyes. The room was bathed in the morning light. It looked the same as it had 5 minutes ago, but the air felt different. The air felt lighter. The heaviness of their presence was gone. I sat up. I did not stretch. I did not rub my eyes. I moved with the precision of a soldier. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood up. I walked to the window and looked out. The street was empty. I turned to the locked door. They thought the lock would hold me. They forgot that I was the one who installed these locks 20 years ago. They forgot that paranoid men always leave themselves an exit strategy. I walked to the bookshelf in the corner of the room. I reached behind the row of accounting textbooks and pulled out a small thin metal tool, a tension wrench. I had kept a lock-picking set in this room since the day Megan moved back in. I walked to the door. I inserted the tool into the keyway. It took me 4 seconds. I felt the pins set. I applied a slight pressure. Click. The lock disengaged. I turned the knob and opened the door. I walked out into the hallway. The house was silent. It was a tomb. But it was about to become a construction site. I went back into my room and picked up my phone. It was fully charged. I dialed the first number on my list. It was the foreman of the moving company. "This is Clint Reeves," I said. My voice was steady and commanding. "The house is empty. The tenants have vacated. You have the green light." "Copy that, Mr. Reeves," the foreman said. "We are 5 minutes out." I hung up and dialed the second number. This was the account manager at Red Shark Holdings. "The property is secured," I said. "I am vacating the premises in 1 hour. You can send your security team to change the locks at noon." "Understood, Mr. Reeves," the manager said. "The wire transfer has been initiated. You should see the funds in your trust account by end of day." "Excellent," I said. I hung up the phone and slipped it into my pocket. I looked around the upstairs hallway one last time. I looked at the family photos on the wall. There was a picture of Megan graduating from college. She looked so innocent then. There was a picture of Brad and Megan at their wedding. They looked happy. I reached out and took the wedding photo off the wall. I looked at it for a moment. Then I dropped it into the trash can by the bathroom door. The glass shattered. I did not feel sad. I felt efficient. I was clearing the ledger. I was writing off a bad debt. I walked down the stairs. The house was waiting. The movers were coming. The investors were coming. The past was leaving. I had 72 hours before they returned. 72 hours to erase 40 years of history. 72 hours to turn this home into a fortress that would bar them entry forever. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. I drank it standing up. I was hydrated. I was focused. I was ready. Let the purge begin. The doorbell rang at exactly 10 o'clock. It was not a friendly chime. It sounded like a gavel hitting a judge's bench. I smoothed the front of my shirt and walked to the door. Standing on the porch was a man who looked like he had been manufactured in a boardroom. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than my first car, and his eyes were scanning the property line before he even looked at me. "Mr. Reeves," he said, extending a hand that felt like cold marble. "I am Mr. Sharp from Red Shark Holdings. Harold said you were ready to do business." I shook his hand briefly. I am ready if you have the check, I said. Mr. Sharp smiled. It was a thin, practiced smile that did not reach his eyes. We do not use checks, Mr. Reeves. We use wire transfers. Instant verified funds. Shall we take a look at the asset? He called my home an asset. Not a house, not a home, just a line item on a balance sheet. I stepped back and let him in. He walked into the foyer and immediately pulled out a tablet. He started tapping the screen, making notes. He did not take off his shoes. I walked him through the living room. The movers were already working in the background, silently wrapping my furniture in thick blue pads. Mr. Sharp ignored them. He walked to the fireplace. It was a custom stone hearth I had built with my own hands 20 years ago. I remembered the summer I built it. Megan was 15. She had sat right there on the rug reading magazines while I mixed the mortar. She had told me about a boy she liked. I had listened and wiped sweat from my forehead, feeling like the luckiest father in the world. Mr. Sharp tapped the stone with his pen. Granite, he muttered. Dated but durable. We will probably paint over it. Whitewash is trending right now. I felt a muscle twitch in my jaw. He was going to paint over the stone I had handpicked from the quarry. He was going to erase the sweat and the memory. I said nothing. I just nodded. We moved to the kitchen. This was where my wife and I had cooked 1,000 meals. This was where we had danced to the radio while the dishwasher hummed. Mr. Sharp opened the cabinet doors and checked the hinges. He turned on the faucet and watched the water drain. Plumbing seems adequate, he said. The cabinetry is oak, heavy grain. We will rip this out. Open concept is what buyers want. We will knock down this wall. He pointed to the wall where I had hung my wife's favorite painting. The painting was gone now, packed in a crate headed for storage. But the ghost of it was still there. He wanted to knock it down. He wanted to turn my sanctuary into a generic showroom. I looked at him. I looked at this man who saw only square footage and potential yield. The house is being sold, as is Mr. Sharp, I said. My voice was flat. That means you get the oak cabinets. You get the stone fireplace. You get the dead tree in the kitchen. You get the memories and the ghosts. I am not fixing anything. I am not painting anything. Mr. Sharp stopped tapping on his tablet. He looked at me. He was assessing me. He was trying to figure out if I was emotional or if I was hard. As is conditions are standard for our acquisitions, he said. However, that usually impacts the valuation. The market assessment for this neighborhood is $950,000, but that assumes a turnkey property. Given the dated interior and the speed you require, we were thinking more in the range of $750,000. I did not blink. I had negotiated settlements with embezzlers who had stolen millions. I knew how to hold my ground. $800,000, I said, and I want the wire initiated within the hour. The title company has the deed ready. The trust is set up. You get the keys at noon. Mr. Sharp laughed softly. You want $50,000 more for a house you are abandoning in 2 hours. That is an expensive hour, Mr. Reeves. It is a bargain, I said. You and I both know this land alone is worth $700,000. You are going to put $50,000 into renovations and flip it for $1.2 million in 3 months. Do not pretend you are losing money here. I am giving you a $400,000 profit margin in exchange for speed. He stopped laughing. He looked at me with a new respect. The predator recognized another predator. You know your numbers, he said. I was a forensic accountant for 40 years, I said. I know exactly what this house is worth, and I know exactly what your time is worth. Do we have a deal, or do I call the next investor on my list? Mr. Sharp paused. He looked around the kitchen one last time. He saw the profit. He saw the easy flip. $800,000, he said. As is. Cash. Closing today. Done, I said. We walked to the dining room table. It was the only piece of furniture left uncovered. He placed his tablet on the table and pulled up a digital contract. "This is a standard purchase agreement," he said. "No contingencies. No inspection period. No financing approval required. Once you sign this, the property belongs to Red Shark Holdings, effective immediately upon transfer of funds." I looked at the screen. The glowing letters spelled out the end of an era. Selling a home usually takes months. It involves open houses and bake sales and nervous waiting. This was a surgical strike. It was violent in its efficiency. I picked up the stylus. My hand hovered over the signature line. I looked out the window at the backyard. I saw the swing set I had built for Leo. I saw the rose bushes my wife had planted. I saw the spot on the lawn where we had hosted 4th of July barbecues. I saw my life played out in a series of film reels. If I signed this, I was homeless. I was cutting the last anchor that held me to this life. But then I thought about the phone call. I thought about the nursing home that smelled like bleach. I thought about Megan and Brad high-fiving in Vegas right now, thinking they had won. I pressed the stylus to the glass. The plastic tip made a small scratching sound. Clint Reeves. I wrote it clearly. I did not rush. I wanted to feel every letter. Mr. Sharp tapped the screen and spun the tablet back around. He tapped a few more buttons. "I am authorizing the wire now," he said. "It is going to the trust account managed by Harold Solomon. Is that correct?" "That is correct," I said. He tapped the screen one last time. "Sent," he said. "You should receive confirmation from your attorney in a few minutes." My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Harold. "Funds received. The trust is funded. The house is gone. You are a free man, Clint." I looked at the text. $800,000. It was a number, a large number, but it felt small compared to what I was leaving behind. Yet it was necessary. This money was not for me. It was for Leo. It was a shield to protect him from the people who were supposed to love him. "Thank you, Mr. Sharp," I said. I handed him the keys. "These are the masters. They opened the front door, the back door, and the garage." Mr. Sharp took the keys. He jangled them in his hand. The sound was jarring. "We will have our security team here at noon to install the smart locks," he said. "You have until then to vacate." "I am leaving now," I said. "The movers are taking the last box." I walked to the door. Mr. Sharp was already on his phone talking to a contractor about demolition. He did not watch me leave. I was just a vendor to him. I stepped out onto the porch. The air was cool. I walked down the steps. I did not look back. I knew that if I looked back, I might crack. I might remember the Christmas wreaths on that door. I might remember the way my wife used to wave to me from that window when I came home from work. I walked to the curb where the taxi was waiting. The driver was a young man with headphones on. He popped the trunk. I put my single suitcase inside. It looked lonely in the large trunk. "Where to?" the driver asked. I looked at the house one last time. It looked the same as it always had. The paint was white. The shutters were black. The lawn was green. But it was a shell. The soul of the house had left with me. "Take me to the airport," I said. I climbed into the back seat. As the taxi pulled away, I pulled up the banking app on my phone. I logged into the trust account. Balance $800,000. I took a screenshot. I would need that later. I opened my email and composed a message to the utility companies. I canceled the electricity. I canceled the water. I canceled the gas. Effective immediately. When Brad and Megan came home, they would not just be locked out. They would be in the dark. I leaned back against the seat. My heart was beating slowly, rhythmically. I checked my pulse, 60 beats per minute. I was not a victim. I was a man who had just completed the biggest transaction of his life. I had traded a house made of wood, and brick for a legacy of truth. The taxi merged onto the highway. The city of Seattle sped by in a blur of gray and green. I closed my eyes. I was tired. But it was a good tired. It was the exhaustion of a man who had cleaned out the rot from his foundation. I was homeless. I was alone. And for the first time in years, I was safe. The shark had eaten the bait. Now all I had to do was wait for the trap to snap shut. The foreman of the moving crew was a man named Mike. He looked like he could lift a piano with one hand, but he had the gentle eyes of a man who had seen too many broken homes. He stood in my foyer holding a clipboard waiting for orders. Behind him stood 6 men ready to strip the flesh off the bones of my house. I looked at Mike. I did not see a mover. I saw an executioner. And I was the judge giving the order. "There are 2 destinations, Mike," I said. I handed him a color-coded floor plan. Everything marked in green goes to the climate-controlled facility in Bellevue. High security, white glove handling. That is the legacy vault. "And the red items?" Mike asked, tapping the clipboard with a thick finger. "The red items go to the self-storage unit on Industrial Way," I said. "The one next to the rendering plant. Do not bother with bubble wrap. Just get it out of my sight." Mike looked at the plan. He looked at the house. He nodded. "Understood, Mr. Reeves. We will start with the master bedroom." I followed them upstairs. This was not moving. This was a surgical separation of a tumor from a healthy body. The tumor was the accumulation of greed and entitlement that Megan and Brad had brought into this house. The healthy body was the memory of my wife and the future of my grandson. I watched 2 men enter Megan and Brad's bedroom. It used to be a guest room until they moved in 3 years ago and claimed it as their fiefdom. They had repainted it a garish shade of modern gray and filled it with furniture that looked expensive but was made of particle board. One of the movers picked up a Louis Vuitton trunk at the foot of the bed. It was heavy. Brad liked to brag that it was vintage. I knew it was a knockoff he bought in Chinatown. "Red tag," I said. "Throw it in the truck." The mover hesitated. "It looks fragile, sir." I looked at the trunk. I looked at the man. "It is trash," I said. "Treat it accordingly." He shrugged and hauled it onto his shoulder. He did not exactly throw it, but he did not carry it like a baby either. He carried it like a sack of potatoes. I felt a grim satisfaction. I moved to the closet. This was the shrine of their vanity. Rows of designer dresses that Megan had bought with my credit cards. Shelves of shoes that cost more than my first car. Suits that Brad wore to play the part of a successful broker while he gambled away his clients' money. I pulled a black garbage bag from my pocket. I snapped it open. "Pack the clothes I ordered. Hangers and all. Do not waste time folding them." The men started sweeping the clothes into the bags. The sound of silk and wool being crushed was music to my ears. It was the sound of a false identity being dismantled. These were not clothes. They were costumes. And the play was over. I walked over to the nightstand on Brad's side of the bed. I opened the drawer. It was filled with the usual detritus of a disorganized man. Loose change, breath mints, casino chips, a stack of receipts. I started sifting through the receipts. My forensic accountant instincts kicked in. I was looking for patterns. I was looking for the story the numbers told. I found a receipt for a bracelet from Tiffany S. dated 3 months ago. Price tag $4,000. I frowned. Megan had not worn a new bracelet in months. In fact, she had complained that Brad never bought her jewelry anymore. I dug deeper. I found a second receipt. A dinner for 2 at a French bistro in downtown Seattle. $200. Dated a Tuesday night. Tuesday nights were when Brad supposedly had his late poker games with the boys. I reached to the back of the drawer and felt something hard and cool. I pulled it out. It was a burner phone, a cheap prepaid model. I turned it on. No passcode. Stupid. I scrolled through the messages. They were not from his poker buddies. They were from a contact listed only as Candy. Can't wait to see you tonight, Tiger. Wear the blue suit. Did you like the bracelet? When are you going to leave the old man and the nag? I stared at the screen. The nag. That was my daughter. My daughter who was currently plotting to put me in a nursing home to fund this man's lifestyle. I did not feel anger for Megan. I felt a cold pity. She was selling her father to buy a future with a man who was already spending her inheritance on another woman. I took a picture of the messages with my own phone. Then I put the burner phone back in the drawer. I put the receipts back exactly where I found them. Pack the nightstand, I told the mover. Tape the drawers shut. Make sure nothing falls out. Why keep the secret? Because information is ammunition, and I was not ready to fire the kill shot yet. I wanted Brad to feel safe. I wanted him to think he had gotten away with it. The fall is always harder when you think you are flying. I left their room and walked down the hall to Leo's room. The air here felt different. It felt lighter. I walked in. It was a typical 10-year-old's chaos. Lego sets scattered on the floor, comic books on the bed, a telescope by the window. 2 movers were standing there waiting for instructions. They looked unsure. Green tag, I said. My voice softened. Everything in this room gets the green tag. Pack the Legos in plastic bins so the pieces do not get lost. Wrap the telescope in the heavy blankets. This is the most important cargo you will carry today. I picked up a framed drawing from Leo's desk. It was a picture of me and him fishing. He had drawn me with huge muscles and a smile that took up half my face. Underneath, he had written Grandpa and me versus the Kraken. I wiped a speck of dust from the glass. This goes in my personal suitcase, I said. I watched them pack Leo's room. I made sure they treated his stuffed dinosaur with the same respect they would treat a Ming vase. These were not just toys. These were the artifacts of a childhood I was trying to save. We moved downstairs. The living room, the dining room, the kitchen. The separation continued. My wife's piano. Green tag. The antique clock she loved. Green tag. The hideous abstract painting Brad bought to look sophisticated. Red tag. The expensive espresso machine Megan demanded, but never learned to use. Red tag. As the house emptied, the acoustics changed. The rooms became echo chambers. My footsteps sounded loud and hollow on the hardwood floors. The walls stripped of photos and art looked vast and blank. It was starting to look like a house again, not a home. Just a structure of wood and drywall. I walked into the kitchen. The dead ficus tree was still sitting on the island. The note I had written fluttered slightly in the draft from the open door. Mike the foreman walked in. He wiped his forehead with a rag. That is the last of it, Mr. Reeves. The green truck is sealed and heading to Bellevue. The red truck is loading the final boxes now. He looked at the dead tree. You want us to take that too? I looked at the withered brown leaves. No, I said. Leave it. It is a housewarming gift for the new owners. Or a warning. Mike nodded. He did not ask questions. He handed me a clipboard. Sign here. And here. I signed. The ink was black and permanent. You know, Mr. Reeves, Mike said, tearing off the carbon copy. I have moved a lot of people. Divorces, bankruptcies, witness protection. I have seen it all. But I have never seen anyone clean a house this thoroughly. It is like you were never here. That is the point, Mike, I said. I was never here. This is a ghost ship. He handed me the receipt. Good luck, sir. I watched the trucks pull away. One turning left toward the secure facility, one turning right toward the dump. It was a metaphor for my family. One path led to preservation. One path led to rot. I stood alone in the empty living room. The sunlight streamed in through the uncurtained windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I walked to the fireplace. I ran my hand along the cold stone. I remembered the warmth of the fires we used to build. I remembered the Christmas stockings. I remembered the laughter. I closed my eyes and let the memories wash over me one last time. Then I visualized a heavy steel door slamming shut on them. I opened my eyes. The warmth was gone. The room was just geometry and physics. I walked to the front door. I stepped out onto the porch. The Red Shark security team was pulling into the driveway. They were carrying drills and boxes of smart locks. I did not wait to greet them. I had already given the keys of Montjefesson to Mr. Sharp. My business here was concluded. I walked down the steps. I did not look back at the house. I looked at the sky. It was vast and indifferent. I had stripped the house of everything that mattered. I had salvaged the good and discarded the bad. I had found the evidence of their betrayal, and I had secured the legacy of my love. I climbed into the waiting taxi. "Airport," I said. As we drove away, I took out my phone. I looked at the photo of the text messages on Brad S. burner phone. "Can't wait to see you tonight, Tiger." I smiled. A cold, humorless smile. "Wait until you see what I have waiting for you, Brad," I whispered. "You are going to wish you were in a cage with a real tiger." The house was empty, but the game board was full, and I had just made the most aggressive move of the match. The sound of a power drill biting into the solid oak doorframe was violent and loud. It echoed through the empty foyer like a scream. I stood in the center of the living room watching the Red Shark security team work. They were not carpenters. They were technicians who moved with military precision. They wore gray uniforms and carried tool belts that looked more like weapon holsters. The lead technician was a man named Miller. He had a scar running down his neck and eyes that did not blink often enough. He was installing a biometric smart lock on the front door. It was a sleek block of black steel that covered the holes where my vintage brass handle used to be. That brass handle had been polished by my wife's hands for 20 years. Now it was in a landfill, and in its place was a machine that required a fingerprint or a 12-digit code to grant access. Miller turned to me. "The system is live, Mr. Reeves. We have installed reinforced strike plates on all exterior doors. The windows have been fitted with shatter sensors. The motion detectors in the hallway are calibrated to ignore anything under 40 pounds, so a stray cat won't trigger it, but a human being definitely will." I nodded. "And the police connection. Direct link," Miller said. He tapped a tablet in his hand. "If the alarm is tripped, the signal bypasses the monitoring center and goes straight to the precinct dispatch. Response time in this neighborhood is under 4 minutes. It is a silent alarm. The intruder will not know the police are coming until they see the lights." I looked at the black keypad. It glowed with a faint, menacing red light. It was not just a lock. It was a trap. When Megan and Brad tried to use their old keys, they would not just find a locked door. They would trigger a sequence of events that would end in handcuffs. "Set the master code," I said. Miller handed me the tablet. I typed in a number. It was the date of my wedding anniversary. The one date Megan had forgotten for the last 10 years. The machine beeped once to accept it. The house was now sealed. Miller and his team packed up their tools. They moved efficiently, sweeping up the sawdust and wiping down the doorframe. They left no trace that they had been there. They were ghosts leaving behind a fortress. "We are done here, sir," Miller said. "The house is secure." "Thank you, Miller." I watched them walk out to their van. Now I was truly alone. The house was empty. The floors were bare. The walls were blank. But I had one last thing to do, one last artifact to leave behind. I walked to the kitchen island. I had kept one piece of paper and one roll of heavy-duty tape. I took a black marker from my pocket. I uncapped it. The smell of the permanent ink was sharp and chemical. I did not need to draft the letter. I had been writing it in my head for 3 days. I had been writing it since the moment I heard my daughter's voice through the Bluetooth speakers. I pressed the marker to the paper. The tip squeaked against the surface. To Megan and Brad. I wrote their names large. I wanted them to see it from the driveway. I did not write about my feelings. I did not write about heartbreak or betrayal. Those are human emotions, and I was dealing with people who had lost their humanity. I wrote facts. Fact number 1. I heard the phone call. I heard you planning to put me in the discount wing of Sunset Pines. I heard you laughing about selling my home to buy a Porsche. Fact number 2. The power of attorney you made me sign was a forgery. The medical proxy was a joke. You own nothing. You control nothing. Fact number 3. This house now belongs to Red Shark Holdings. You are currently standing on private property. The police are already on their way. Fact number 4. I emptied the bank accounts. The money is in an irrevocable trust for Leo. You cannot touch a dime. The credit cards you stole are frozen. The gambling debts you owe are yours alone. And finally, I paused. The marker hovered over the paper. I thought about the little girl I used to carry on my shoulders. I thought about the woman who had tried to poison me with sleeping pills. I wrote the final line. I did not go to a nursing home. I went to find a life where I am respected. Do not look for me. You will not find me. But I suspect the creditors you owe money to will have no trouble finding you. I signed it simply. Clint. I did not write Dad. I did not write Father. Those were titles earned by love, and they had been forfeited by greed. I picked up the paper. It felt heavy in my hand. I walked to the front door. The new glass panel was reinforced and tinted. I took the roll of tape and secured the note to the inside of the glass. I taped every corner. I taped the edges. I wanted to make sure it was perfectly flat, perfectly legible. I stepped back and looked at it. The white paper stood out starkly against the dark interior of the house. It was a tombstone epitaph for our family. I checked my watch. It was 11:45. The taxi was waiting at the curb. I took one last look around the foyer. The sunlight was hitting the dust motes dancing in the air. It was quiet. A peaceful silence. Not the silence of loneliness, but the silence of resolution. I opened the front door. The alarm panel started a slow, beeping countdown. I had 60 seconds to exit before the system armed itself. I stepped out onto the porch. The air outside was fresh and smelled of the ocean. I closed the heavy door behind me. Thud. The sound was solid. Final. I heard the electronic whir of the deadbolt sliding into place automatically. Then came a high-pitched chirp. The system was armed. The trap was set. I walked down the steps. My knees did not hurt today. My back was straight. I carried my suitcase in my left hand. It contained everything I owned in this world, and it felt light. The taxi driver was leaning against his car, smoking a cigarette. He tossed it on the ground when he saw me and opened the back door. "Airport," he asked again. "Airport," I said. And then the international terminal. I slid into the back seat. The leather was cool against my legs. As the driver pulled away from the curb, I felt the urge to look back. It is a natural human instinct to look at the place you are leaving, to say a silent goodbye. But I fought it. Lot's wife looked back and turned to a pillar of salt. If I looked back, I might turn into a pillar of regret. I might remember the good times and falter. I kept my eyes fixed on the road ahead. I watched the houses of my neighbors blur past. I watched the familiar streets of my neighborhood disappear. The house behind me was no longer a home. It was a weapon. It was a ticking time bomb waiting for two people to come back from Las Vegas with hangovers and empty pockets. I imagined the scene. I imagined them walking up the driveway, dragging their luggage. I imagined Brad trying his key and finding it useless. I imagined Megan reading the note. I imagined the color draining from her face. I imagined the siren of the police car approaching. A smile touched my lips. It was not a smile of happiness. It was the smile of a forensic accountant who had just balanced the books. The deficit had been cleared. The fraud had been exposed. I took my phone out of my pocket. I removed the SIM card. It was a tiny piece of plastic that connected me to them. I rolled down the window. The wind whipped into the car. I flicked the SIM card out into the rushing traffic. It bounced once on the asphalt and was crushed under the wheels of a delivery truck. I rolled the window back up. The silence returned. I was 72 years old. I had no home. I had no family, except for a grandson I would watch from afar. I was starting over with nothing but a suitcase and my dignity. And for the first time in a long time, I was looking forward to the future. "Drive fast," I told the driver. "I have a plane to catch." The taxi accelerated, merging onto the highway. I closed my eyes and let the hum of the engine lull me. Behind me, the house sat in silence, waiting for its victims. The fortress was sealed. The stage was set. And I was gone. I was not there to see it, but I know exactly how it happened. I know the physics of a car crash, and I know the physics of a life crashing into a wall. The variables are different, but the math is the same. When high-velocity entitlement meets an immovable object, the result is always catastrophic. It was 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. The neighborhood was asleep. The streetlights cast long orange shadows on the pavement. The only sound was the distant hum of the highway. Then a yellow taxi screeched to a halt in front of my former house. The brakes squealed. It was an ugly sound that shattered the peace of the night. The back doors flew open. Brad and Megan stumbled out. They did not look like the confident power couple that had left for Las Vegas 3 days ago. They looked like wreckage. Brad's suit was rumpled and stained with something that looked like bourbon. His tie was loose, hanging around his neck like a noose. Megan was missing a heel on her left shoe. She was limping, holding her expensive purse close to her chest, as if it contained the last of her dignity. They were arguing. Their voices were loud and slurred, carrying through the crisp night air. "You said you had a system," Megan screamed. "You said double down on black was a guaranteed win." "Shut up," Brad shouted back. He slammed the taxi door so hard the vehicle shook. "I would have won if you had not distracted me." "You are bad luck, Megan. You have always been bad luck." The taxi driver did not wait for a tip. He did not even wait for them to clear the curb. He sped off, leaving a cloud of exhaust fumes in his wake. He knew trouble when he saw it. They were left standing on the sidewalk. 2 broke gamblers with nothing but their suitcases and a hangover. "Let's just get inside," Megan whined. She was shivering. "I need a shower. I need to sleep for a week." Brad grabbed his suitcase. The wheels clattered loudly on the concrete driveway. He marched toward the front door with the aggressive, stumbling gait of a drunk man who is trying to prove he is sober. I can imagine him reaching into his pocket for his keys. I can imagine the frustration when his fingers fumbled with the metal ring. He pulled out the key to the front door. The key that had worked for 3 years. The key that represented his access to my money and my life. He jammed the key toward the lock. But there was no keyhole. Brad stopped. He swayed on his feet. He squinted at the door. Where the brass handle used to be, there was now a sleek black panel of tempered glass and steel. It was the biometric scanner Miller had installed. It was a monolith of rejection. "What the hell?" Brad muttered. He rubbed his eyes. He thought he was hallucinating. He thought the whiskey was playing tricks on him. He tried to jam the key into the space between the lock and the frame. Metal scratched against metal. "Open the damn door," he shouted. He kicked the wood. Megan hobbled up behind him. "What are you doing, Brad? Just open it." "It is broken," Brad yelled. He turned to her, his face red and sweaty. "The lock is gone. Someone changed the lock." "You are drunk," Megan said, pushing him aside. "Let me do it." She reached for the handle. She expected to turn it and walk into her warm living room. Instead, her hand met the cold, unyielding surface of the scanner. The panel lit up. A red ring pulsed in the center. It looked like a disapproving eye. "Access denied," a robotic voice spoke from the panel. The volume was calibrated to be loud. Megan jumped back. "What is that?" Brad was losing his temper. He was tired. He was humiliated. He had just lost $50,000 at the roulette table, and now his own house was mocking him. He dropped his suitcase. He made a fist. "Open up!" he roared. He pounded on the door with both hands. "I live here! Open this door right now!" He did not know it, but he had just triggered the first layer of the defense protocol. The vibration sensors in the door frame registered an impact of over 40 pounds per square inch. The system identified a hostile breach attempt. The reaction was instantaneous. Click, buzz. The floodlights mounted under the eaves snapped on. These were not soft garden lights. These were halogen security lamps with 5,000 lumens of brightness. They were designed to blind. The front porch was suddenly bathed in a white light so intense it felt like an interrogation room. Megan screamed and covered her eyes. Brad staggered back, shielding his face with his arm. "Turn it off," he yelled. "Turn off the lights!" But the house was not done. The second layer of the protocol engaged. The siren began. It was a high-pitched wail that rose and fell in a piercing rhythm. It was 120 decibels. It was loud enough to be heard 3 blocks away. It was a sound designed to induce panic and disorientation. Brad and Megan were trapped in a bubble of blinding light and deafening noise. They were shouting at each other, but they could not hear their own voices. Brad lost control. He picked up a decorative rock from the garden bed. "I will break you," he screamed at the door. He hurled the rock at the glass panel I had taped the note to. The rock bounced off the reinforced impact-resistant glass with a dull thud. It did not even leave a scratch, but it did trigger the final layer of the trap. The silent alarm at the police precinct turned red. Dispatch saw the code. Attempted forced entry. Home invasion in progress. Priority 1. Brad and Megan did not know the police were coming. They were too busy fighting the house. Brad was kicking the door again and again. Megan was crying, sitting on her suitcase with her hands over her ears. Then came the blue lights. They cut through the white glare of the floodlights. They danced across the front lawn. 1 cruiser, then 2, then 3. They screeched to a halt at the bottom of the driveway. Brad spun around. He was blinded by the headlights. He could not see who was there. He only saw silhouettes. "Get off my property!" he screamed. He was so drunk he thought they were the debt collectors from Vegas. "I will pay you next week." "Police," one of the silhouettes shouted. "Drop the weapon. Get on the ground. Now!" Brad was holding his shoe in his hand. He had taken it off to use as a hammer against the door. To the officers in the dark, it looked like a weapon. "I said get on the ground," the officer commanded. Brad did not drop the shoe. He took a step forward. "Do you know who I am?" he slurred. "I own this house. I am a victim here." That was the wrong move. 2 officers rushed him. They moved with the speed of men who deal with danger every night. One of them swept Brad's legs. He hit the grass with a heavy thud. The air left his lungs in a gasp. His face was pressed into the wet dirt of the lawn he refused to mow. His arm was twisted behind his back. The cold steel of handcuffs clicked around his wrists. "You are breaking my arm!" Brad screamed. "I am going to sue you! I am going to sue everyone!" Megan tried to stand up. She tried to run toward him. "Brad!" she wailed. "Ma'am, stay where you are!" a female officer yelled, pointing a taser at her. "Hands where I can see them." "I live here," Megan sobbed. "I am Megan Reeves. This is my father's house." The officer did not lower the weapon. "We have a report of a break-in at a property owned by Red Shark Holdings. The owner is not listed as Reeves. Now get on your knees and put your hands behind your head." Megan froze. The name hit her like a physical blow. Red Shark Holdings. She looked at the house. She looked at the blinding lights. She looked at the black door that refused to open. She slowly sank to her knees. Her designer dress was soaked in the mud. Her expensive purse lay open on the grass, spilling lipstick and maxed-out credit cards onto the ground. The siren finally cut off, leaving a ringing silence in the air. The only sounds were the heavy breathing of the officers and the sobbing of my daughter. I imagined the neighbors were watching from their windows. I imagined they saw the flashing lights and the handcuffed couple being dragged toward the squad cars. They probably shook their heads. They probably thought it was a tragedy. But I knew the truth. It was not a tragedy. It was a correction. The officer pulled Brad to his feet. Brad was crying now. The alcohol was wearing off, and the reality was setting in. "Check the door," he pleaded. "Just check the door. My key works. I swear it works." The officer looked at the door. He looked at the sleek black biometric lock. He looked back at the cheap metal key in Brad's hand. "That key does not fit that lock, son," the officer said. He shoved Brad into the back of the cruiser. Brad hit his head on the doorframe. He slumped against the seat, defeated. Megan was placed in the second car. She pressed her face against the window. She was looking at the front door. Under the harsh glare of the security lights, she finally saw something she had missed in the chaos. She saw the white piece of paper taped behind the glass. She saw her name written in black marker. But the car was already moving. She could not read it yet. She could only wonder. The convoy of police cars pulled away. The red and blue lights faded into the distance. The house stood silent again. The floodlights turned off automatically, returning the porch to darkness. The biometric lock pulsed with its slow, steady red light. It had done its job. It had protected the asset. It had rejected the virus. I was 3,000 miles away, sitting in a comfortable chair in an airport lounge waiting for my flight to Costa Rica. I took a sip of my sparkling water. I checked my watch. "Right on time," I whispered. The first domino had fallen. The crash was loud. The damage was total. And the best part was that I did not have to lift a finger. I just had to change a lock and let gravity do the rest. The back of a police cruiser is a cold and unforgiving place. It is designed to strip away your ego. It is a cage of hard plastic and metal mesh that smells of stale sweat and disinfectant. Megan sat in the back of the first cruiser, her hands cuffed behind her back, pressing uncomfortably against her spine. The mud from the lawn was drying on her expensive dress, turning into a crusty gray shell. She was shivering uncontrollably, but it was not from the cold. It was from the shock. Outside the car, Brad was still arguing. He was leaning against the hood of the second cruiser, shouting at the sergeant. His voice was hoarse, a mixture of drunken bravado and rising panic. He kept repeating the same phrase over and over like a broken record. "You cannot do this. I have rights. This is my property." The sergeant was a man named Miller. He was older, with gray hair cut close to his scalp, and eyes that had seen every kind of lie a human being can tell. He did not look impressed by Brad's shouting. He looked bored. He held a tablet in his hand, the screen glowing blue in the darkness. "Mr. Wilson," the sergeant said calmly, cutting through Brad's tirade, "I am going to show you this exactly one time. Look at the screen." He held the tablet up. Brad squinted at it, blinking against the glare. Megan pressed her face against the window of her car, trying to see what was happening. "That is the property deed recorded with the county clerk," the sergeant said. "Look at the timestamp. It was filed yesterday at 11:30 a.m. The owner is listed as Red Shark Holdings, LLC. The sale was a cash transaction. It is closed. It is final. You are standing on corporate property, and you just tried to smash their front door with a rock." Brad stared at the screen. His mouth opened and closed like a fish on a dock. "Yesterday," he whispered. "But we were here yesterday morning. The old man was here." The sergeant swiped the screen. "And here is the transfer authorization signed by one Clinton Reeves. The signature is notarized." Brad looked at the signature. It was Clint's handwriting. Sharp, angular, and precise. It was the signature of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. "He sold it," Brad stammered. "He sold it while we were on the plane." The sergeant put the tablet away. He looked at the house. The floodlights had turned off, but the porch was still illuminated by the tactical lights from the police cars. He pointed a gloved finger toward the front door. "The new owners stated that the previous tenant left a communication for you," the sergeant said. "We are tagging it as evidence, but I think you should read it. It might explain why you are going to jail tonight instead of sleeping in a king-sized bed." He walked over to Megan's car and opened the door. He did not uncuff her. He just leaned in. "Ma'am," he said, "do you see the note on the door?" Megan looked. Under the beam of the sergeant's flashlight, the white piece of paper taped to the glass seemed to glow. She could see her name written in black marker. It was her father's handwriting. "Bring her closer," the sergeant ordered. Another officer grabbed Megan's arm and guided her out of the car. She stumbled, her legs numb. They walked her up the driveway. The gravel crunched under her broken shoe. Every step felt like a march to the gallows. They stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. The sergeant shone his light directly on the paper. "Read it," he said. Megan squinted. Her eyes were swollen from crying. She started to read. At first, the words were just ink on paper. But as her brain processed them, they turned into a voice. It was her father's voice. Not the weak, trembling voice he had used for the last month, but the cold, commanding voice of the auditor. The voice of the man who used to put criminals in prison. To Megan and Brad, the letter began. "I know about the Bluetooth." Megan stopped breathing. The air trapped in her lungs turned to ice. The Bluetooth. The garage. The conversation she had with Brad about the nursing home. He had heard it. He had heard every word. She read on. "I know you plan to put me in the state wing of Sunset Pines. I know you plan to sell my home to pay for your gambling debts. I know you think I am a senile old man who can be discarded like trash." Megan felt a wave of nausea. He knew. He had been playing them the whole time. The dinner, the signing of the papers, the smile as they left for the airport. It was all a performance. But the next paragraph was the one that made her knees buckle. "I also know about the blue pill." Megan let out a small whimper. Brad, who had been dragged up beside her, went rigid. "I know you swapped my heart medication for Halcyon," the letter continued. "I know you wanted to sedate me so I would not interfere with your open house. Attempted poisoning of an elderly person is a serious crime, Megan. I did not take the pill. I gave it to the ficus tree in the kitchen. You will find the dead tree on the island. The police can analyze the soil if they need further evidence for the indictment." Megan stared at the words. Indictment. Poisoning. This was not just a family dispute anymore. This was a felony. He had evidence. He had the pill. He had the tree. She looked at Brad. His face was the color of ash. He understood what this meant. They were not just homeless. They were looking at prison time. The letter ended with a final brutal blow. The money from the house sale is in an irrevocable trust for Leo. You cannot touch it. The credit cards you opened in my name have been reported as fraudulent. The bank knows it was you, Brad. They have your IP address. Enjoy the night. Clint. Megan stared at the signature. It was just a name, but it felt like a judge's gavel slamming down. She looked up at the sergeant. He was reading the note too over her shoulder. He let out a low whistle. That is a lot of probable cause right there, the sergeant said. He looked at Megan with a new expression. It was not boredom anymore. It was disgust. You tried to drug your own father. No, Megan whispered. It was just to help him sleep. He was confused. You have the right to remain silent, the sergeant said, cutting her off. And I suggest you use it. Because based on this note, your father is not confused. He is 5 steps ahead of you. Brad started to struggle. He pulled against the handcuffs. This is a setup, he screamed. The old man is crazy. He is lying. The sergeant nodded to the other officers. Get them out of here. Book them for trespassing and breaking and entering. And get detectives on the fraud and assault charges in the morning. The officers grabbed them. Megan was dragged back toward the car. She twisted her head, looking back at the house. The note was still there, taped to the glass. It was the only thing left of her father. A white flag of surrender that she had forced him to wave. But he hadn't surrendered. He had detonated the bridge while they were still standing on it. As the police car door slammed shut, trapping her inside, Megan realized the true horror of her situation. She was broke. She was homeless. She was facing criminal charges. And the only person who could have saved her, the only person who had always saved her, was the man she had tried to destroy. She leaned her head against the cold window and screamed. It was a silent scream lost in the back of a police cruiser speeding toward a jail cell. The house grew smaller in the rearview mirror, a fortress of justice standing silent under the moon. And somewhere far away, she knew her father was sleeping soundly for the first time in years. The back of a police car is soundproof to the outside world, but inside it is an echo chamber for panic. Brad sat slumped against the plastic seat, his hands cuffed behind him, his forehead resting against the metal mesh that separated him from the officers in the front. He was sobering up fast, and with sobriety came terror. The officer driving the cruiser was not in a hurry. He was filling out paperwork on a laptop while the car idled in the driveway. The red and blue lights were still flashing, painting the neighborhood in a chaotic disco rhythm. Then Brad's phone rang. It was in his jacket pocket. The jacket he was still wearing even though his hands were cuffed. The ringing was loud and insistent. It was a default ringtone, but to Brad it sounded like a funeral dirge. The officer in the passenger seat turned around. You want to get that? He asked sarcastically. Oh, wait, you can't. Brad's face went pale. Please, he begged. Please answer it. It might be my lawyer. The officer sighed. He reached over the seat and fished the phone out of Brad's pocket. He looked at the screen. Caller ID says Big Tony, the officer said, raising an eyebrow. Is that your lawyer, son? Sounds more like a pizza guy or a loan shark. Brad started to hyperventilate. Don't answer it, he whispered. Just let it ring. But the officer pressed the speaker button. Hello, the officer said cheerfully. This is Officer Miller of the Seattle Police Department. Who is this? There was a long silence on the other end. Then a voice spoke. It was deep, calm, and terrifyingly professional. Officer Miller, I seem to have dialed the wrong number. I was looking for Mr. Wilson. Mr. Wilson is currently indisposed. Officer Miller said, looking at Brad in the rearview mirror. He is being transported to the precinct for booking on charges of trespassing and breaking and entering. Can I take a message? Another pause. Tell Mr. Wilson that his grace period expired at midnight, the voice said. Tell him that assets are being liquidated as we speak. Click. The line went dead. Brad let out a moan that sounded like a wounded animal. He slammed his head against the window. No, 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 he sobbed. They are going to kill me. They are going to kill me. In the second cruiser parked right behind them, Megan was watching her husband unravel. She could not hear the phone call, but she could see Brad thrashing against his restraints. She saw the terror in his eyes. Suddenly, the officer in Brad's car opened the door. He leaned in. Your friend Tony seems upset, he said. He mentioned liquidating assets. Care to explain? Brad looked at the officer. Then he looked out the window at Megan. His eyes were not full of love anymore. They were full of hate. Pure, unadulterated hate. It is her fault, Brad screamed. His voice was muffled by the glass, but Megan could read his lips. It is all her fault. The officer closed the door. He walked back to Megan's car. He opened the back door. Your husband seems to think you are to blame for his financial troubles, ma'am, the officer said. He is saying something about a plan you cooked up. Something about you guaranteeing the money. Megan felt a cold knot in her stomach. Brad was turning on her. Of course he was. He was a coward. He is lying. Megan said, her voice trembling. He is the one with the gambling problem. He is the one who owes money to criminals. Suddenly the door of the first cruiser flew open. Brad had managed to kick it with his legs. He tumbled out onto the driveway, landing hard on his shoulder. He scrambled to his knees, shouting at the top of his lungs. You stupid witch, Brad screamed at Megan. You said the old man was senile. You said he would sign anything. You said we would have the money by Tuesday. He tried to run toward Megan's car. He looked insane, his suit torn, his hair wild. Officers tackled him before he got 2 steps, but he kept screaming. I borrowed 50 grand against that house, Megan. Because of you. Because you said it was a sure thing. Now they are going to break my legs. And it is all your fault. Megan watched him being pressed into the gravel. She saw the man she had betrayed her father for. She saw a weak, pathetic creature who would sell her out in a heartbeat to save his own skin. You are pathetic, Brad, she screamed back through the open door. You are a loser. My father was right about you. He was always right. Brad spat a glob of blood and saliva onto the driveway. Your father played you, he yelled. He played you like a fiddle. You thought you were the smart one. You thought you were the heiress. Now look at you. You are nothing. The officers hauled Brad back to his feet. They shoved him into the car and slammed the door. Megan sat back in her seat. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her cold and empty. She looked at the house one last time. The police lights reflected off the dark windows. The house looked like a fortress. It was impenetrable. She thought about the letter. I did not go to a nursing home. I went to find a life where I am respected. She realized then that her father had not just escaped. He had ascended. He had risen above their petty greed and their toxic maneuvering. He was gone, and he had taken his dignity with him. The convoy started to move. The tires crunched on the gravel. Megan watched her childhood home disappear into the darkness. She was alone. She was handcuffed. She was broke. And somewhere in the city, a man named Big Tony was looking for his money. The dominoes had fallen, and Megan was buried under the rubble. 1 week later, I sat at the head of a long mahogany table in Harold Solomon's conference room. The air conditioning was humming a low, steady drone that sounded like a waiting room for purgatory. On one side of the table sat Harold and me. On the other side sat Megan, Brad, and a lawyer they had hired from a billboard advertisement. His name was Mr. Green, and he wore a suit that was 2 sizes too big and smelled of cheap cologne. Megan looked like a ghost. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and she wore no makeup. The circles under her eyes were dark bruises of exhaustion. She had spent 2 nights in jail before making bail, and the experience had stripped away her arrogance. Brad sat as far away from her as possible. His arm was in a sling from where he had fallen on the driveway. He refused to look at me. He refused to look at Megan. He just stared at the pitcher of water in the center of the table as if he wanted to drown in it. Mr. Green cleared his throat. He shuffled a stack of papers that looked impressive but meant nothing. "We are here to discuss the illegal seizure of my client's assets," he began. His voice was nasally and irritating. Mr. Reeves took advantage of his position as a trustee to liquidate a property that was promised to my client. Furthermore, we contend that Mr. Reeves was not of sound mind when he executed the sale. We are filing a motion to annul the sale and return the funds to the joint estate. I looked at Harold. He was leaning back in his chair, cleaning his glasses with a silk cloth. He looked like a panther watching a mouse try to explain why it should not be eaten. "Are you finished?" Mr. Green, Harold asked softly. Mr. Green puffed out his chest. "We are also seeking damages for emotional distress and false imprisonment due to the incident with the security system. We want the $800,000 returned immediately, plus punitive damages." I laughed. It was a short, sharp sound. Mr. Green glared at me. "You find this funny, Mr. Reeves?" "I find it adorable," I said. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. "You think this is a negotiation? You think you have leverage? You have nothing." Harold put his glasses back on. He opened a black folder that had been sitting in front of him. He did not slide it across the table. He just opened it so the contents were visible to him alone. "Mr. Green," Harold said, "before you file those motions, you should know that my client has prepared a counterfiling. It is not a civil suit. It is a criminal dossier." Brad's head snapped up. "Criminal," he squeaked. Harold pulled out a photo. It was a picture of the text messages from Brad's burner phone, the ones from the woman named Candy. "Exhibit A," Harold said. "Proof of infidelity and conspiracy to defraud a senior citizen." "Brad, you were borrowing money from loan sharks based on the promise of selling a house you did not own. That is called fraud by deception." Megan turned to look at Brad. Her eyes were wide with betrayal. "You told me it was for business," she whispered. "You told me the loans were for the startup." Brad shrank into his chair. He did not deny it. Harold pulled out a second document. It was a lab report from a private toxicology firm. "Exhibit B," Harold continued. "This is the analysis of the soil from the potted ficus tree found in the kitchen of the former residence. The soil tested positive for a lethal concentration of triazolam." The room went dead silent. Mr. Green stopped shuffling his papers. He looked at the report. Then he looked at his clients. He saw the color drain from Megan's face. He saw the way her hands started to tremble. He realized in that moment that he was not representing victims. He was representing potential murderers. Harold looked directly at Megan. "Attempted murder via poisoning carries a sentence of 20 years to life in this state. We have the pill bottle. We have the soil. We have the motive." Megan started to cry. It was a silent, terrified weeping. "I didn't mean to hurt him," she sobbed. "I just wanted him to sleep. I just wanted the house." Mr. Green closed his briefcase. "I cannot represent you in a criminal matter," he said, standing up. "I am a civil attorney. This meeting is over." "Sit down," Harold commanded. His voice cracked like a whip. Mr. Green sat down. He looked terrified. "We are not going to the police," Harold said. "Not yet. My client is a generous man. He is offering you a deal." I watched them. I watched the hope flicker in their eyes. They were rats in a trap looking for the piece of cheese. "What deal?" Brad asked. His voice was hoarse. I spoke for the first time. I looked at Megan. I looked at the daughter I had raised, and I saw that there was nothing left to say. But there was someone else. "Leo," I said. Megan wiped her eyes. "What about Leo?" "You are unfit parents," I said. "You are gamblers. You are thieves. You are attempted murderers. You are dragging that boy into a life of debt and instability. I will not allow it." I slid a document across the table. It was a single page. Simple. Brutal. "You will sign full legal custody of Leo over to me," I said. "You will waive all parental rights. You will agree to a restraining order preventing you from coming within 500 feet of him or me." Megan gasped. "You want to take my son?" "I am saving your son," I corrected her. "And in exchange," Brad asked. He was leaning forward. He did not care about the boy. He cared about his own skin. "In exchange," I said, "I will destroy the soil sample. I will delete the photos of the text messages. I will not press charges for the credit card fraud. I will not send you to prison." I looked at Brad. "You can walk out of here today free. You will be broke. You will have to deal with your loan sharks on your own. But you will not be in a cage." Brad grabbed the pen. He did not hesitate. He did not look at Megan. He did not ask about visitation. He just wanted out. "Where do I sign?" he asked. Megan grabbed his arm. "Brad, what are you doing?" "That is our son." Brad shook her off. "We are looking at 20 years, Megan. 20 years. I am not going to prison because you couldn't handle your father. Sign the paper. We can have another kid. We can't have another life." I watched the realization hit Megan. She saw her husband for what he was, a coward. She looked at me. She looked for mercy. "Dad, please," she whispered. "Don't do this. I am not your dad," I said coldly. "I am the plaintiff, and you have 10 seconds to sign before Harold calls the district attorney." Harold picked up his phone. He started to dial. 1, 2, 3. Megan looked at the phone. She looked at the lab report. She looked at the photo of the burner phone. She saw the walls closing in. "Give me the pen," she choked out. She signed. Her hand was shaking so badly, the signature was barely legible. But it was there. She had traded her child for her freedom. She had proven my point better than any argument could. She loved herself more than she loved her son. Harold took the document. He checked the signatures. He stamped it with his notary seal. "It is done," Harold said. I stood up. I picked up the document. I did not look at them. "Get out," I said. Megan stood up. She looked small and broken. "Can I say goodbye to him?" she asked. "Can I just tell him I love him? If you loved him, you would not have tried to kill his grandfather for a down payment on a Porsche," I said. "Get out." They left the room. They walked out into the hallway, and I heard them start arguing before the elevator doors even closed. They would blame each other for the rest of their miserable lives. They would act like victims. But they would never hurt Leo again. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. I felt a weight lift off my chest. It was not happiness. It was relief. "You know," Clint Harold said, closing the file, "you gave up a lot of leverage. You could have put them away for a long time." I turned to my friend. "I did not want justice, Harold. I wanted a future. I bought Leo's freedom for the price of my silence. That is a bargain." Harold nodded. He understood. He handed me the file containing the custody papers. "So what now?" he asked. "Now," I said, taking the file, "I go pick up my son." I corrected myself. my grandson. But in my heart I knew he was my son now. I would raise him to be a man of honor. I would raise him to know the value of $1 and the value of a promise. And I would make sure he never ever became someone like his parents. I walked out of the conference room. I had no house. I had no daughter. But I had the one thing that mattered. I had the next generation. And this time I was going to get it right. The water of the lake was perfectly still. It reflected the tall pine trees and the gray sky like a mirror. It was a small cabin 2 hours north of the city, far away from the noise of traffic and the reach of greedy relatives. It was not a mansion. It did not have a granite fireplace or smart locks. It had a wood stove and a porch that smelled of cedar. It was small. It was simple. And it was the most beautiful place I had ever seen, because it was paid for with clean money and inhabited by a clean conscience. Leo sat on the end of the wooden dock, his legs dangling over the edge. He was wearing a thick wool sweater and holding the fishing rod I had given him for his birthday. He was not looking at an iPad. He was not worrying about his parents arguing over gambling debts. He was watching the red and white bobber float on the surface of the water, waiting for a ripple. I sat in the folding chair behind him, sipping coffee from a metal thermos. The air was crisp and cold, but I did not feel the chill. For the first time in months, the knot of anxiety in my chest was gone. People tell you that blood is thicker than water. They tell you that you must forgive family no matter what they do because they are your kin. I used to believe that. I used to believe that being a father meant being a doormat. I used to believe that love meant letting someone drain you dry until there was nothing left but a husk. But looking at the back of my grandson's head, I realized that is a lie. That is a lie told by predators to keep their prey close. I do not know where Megan and Brad are living today. I do not know if they are working minimum wage jobs or if they are running a new scam in a new city. To be honest, I do not care. They are strangers to me now. They are just names on a legal document that severed our connection forever. They chose money over loyalty. They chose a quick payout over a lifetime of support. And in the end, they got neither. I looked at my hands. They were old hands. They were spotted with age and scarred from years of work. But they were strong enough to hold a fishing rod. They were strong enough to sign a check. And they were strong enough to protect the one person in this world who actually needed me. I learned the hard way that family is not about DNA. It is not about who you share a last name with or whose eyes you have. Biology is just an accident of birth. Family are the people who do not look at you and see a burden. Family are the people who do not count the days until you die so they can sell your things. Family are the people who respect your dignity when you are too old to fight for it yourself. Grandpa Leo whispered, breaking the silence. He pointed at the water. I think I got one. I watched the line go tight. I saw the tip of the rod bend. I watched him reel it in with a focus that reminded me of myself 40 years ago. I stood up and walked to the edge of the dock. I reached out and put a hand on his shoulder to steady him. I got you, son, I said. I am right here. He looked up at me and smiled. It was a real smile. It was not a smile asking for money. It was not a smile hiding a lie. It was just joy. We landed the fish. It was small, but to us it was a trophy. We released it back into the water and watched it swim away. I sat back down and looked out at the horizon. The sun was starting to break through the clouds, casting a golden light on the water. My daughter wanted to get rid of me. She wanted to erase me. Instead, she gave me a new life. She gave me a second chance to be a father, but this time to a boy who deserved it. I took a deep breath of the pine-scented air. I was 72 years old. I had lost a house, but I had found a home. The bobber floated on the water. The world was quiet. And finally, so was my heart. I learned that being a parent does not mean setting yourself on fire to keep your children warm. For years, I thought love was about endless giving, but I realized that true love also means teaching consequences. By protecting my assets, I did not just save my dignity, I saved my grandson from a toxic legacy. We often fear being alone, but solitude with respect is far better than company with contempt. Do not let blood be an excuse for abuse. When the roots are rotten, you must cut the tree down to let the new saplings grow. If you have ever had to stand your ground against family, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of justice served cold. Let me know in the comments, would you have forgiven them or did I do the right thing?